I'm Sari Cooper, a certified sex therapist and sex coach in New York City. I'll be your host to Sex Esteem, a new show where we will explore in all its expressions relationships and sex in the modern world. Tune in for fun-filled facts and entertaining tips to having a more pleasurable sex life. Welcome, everyone, to another Sex Esteem with Sari interview. I'm really excited for today's subject. Deborah Copaken is the New York Times bestselling author of 7 books, including Shutter Babe, The Red Book, Between Here and April, and Ladyparts. This is her most recent memoir of bodily destruction and resurrection during marital rupture. A contributing writer at The Atlantic, she was also a writer on the Emmy, Golden Globe nominated Netflix hit Emily in Paris, which many of you I'm sure watched, performer for The Moth, and an Emmy award-winning news producer and photojournalist. Her photographs have appeared in Time, Newsweek, and the New York Times, and her writing has appeared in the New Yorker, the New York Times, the Guardian, the Financial Times, Observer, the Wall Street Journal, The Nation, Slate, O, the Oprah magazine, and Paris Match, among many others. Her column, When Cupid is a Prying Journalist, was adapted for the Modern Love streaming series. She's a writer, producer, CEO, and publisher of the Substack Ladyparts, and she's currently adapting Ladyparts, the book, into a series. So this is the book. It came out last year, and I was so excited when I got to, buy it right away and read it. It's just taken a while to have this conversation. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much. In fact, I think we might have actually yet met exactly a year ago, maybe today. So exciting. That's really exciting.
That's so funny. Well, sometimes it shows, like, you have to keep that intention.
Yeah.
So let's start by saying, like, I'm so in awe of your multiple talents, both like in the visual realm through your photojournalism career that propelled you to Afghanistan to shoot freedom fighters, and which you wrote about in that best-selling novel, Shutter Babe. But it also highlighted your expertise with words on the page. And it results in, like, literally visceral reactions when I read your work. And especially in this book, Ladyparts, like from the first chapter, you're starting out with this scene where your body is going through what is called a vaginal cuff dehiscence.
Good job. Yep. Good.
And I felt like I was like grabbed into watching this scene in a way that, like, my whole body felt like shock and panic and even disgust, but also like morbidly humorous way that you wrote about it, as your body literally was gushing out of you. And I appreciate it even in the most extreme, the most mundane of circumstances. You also invite us into the mental gymnastics where you're calculating regarding how much of each of these health events are going to cost. So this medical emergency is extremely rare. But also there's been, I did the research as you did too, and there's a paucity of research done on it, according to a 2020 literature review. Can you talk about why you the opening scene in this book was this description?
So I thought that to begin the book, I should begin in medias res, right? So when we begin any sort of narrative, it's always good. I prefer books that begin like right in the middle of the worst part, because you want to know how the author got there and how she's going to get out of it. And so then I've often written my books in present tense. So whatever's happening in the immediate present tense is moving us forward in time. And that way I can use past tense for whatever came before and future tense for what's going to happen. So I can weave back and forth in time that way. I also just wanted the audience or my readers to know how bad it can get in America. What is American healthcare? What is it that brought me to that moment where I'm literally gushing giant blood clots? And I would say, and I just had an op-ed today in the Daily Beast about, well, these hearing aids. So I got COVID I got COVID and then I became deaf from COVID. And dealing with this deafness is just like, it's chapter 7 of this book at this point. It's like this ongoing thing. And it's what I was trying to do with the blood clots, and particularly the really visual aspect of it, is here's how bad it can get. Let's put a little humor here because otherwise we can't swallow this. But here's how bad things can get. Here's how bad things are for American women. Here's how bad things are for American middle-aged women in menopause, which is really bad. Nobody's studying our bodies. Nobody's giving us good advice. The reason I was having this, absurd near death was that when I got a hysterectomy for the adenomyosis that it took 16 years to diagnose.
Can you just define what that diagnosis is?
Sure. Adenomyosis is like endometriosis, but the stuff's growing on the outside of the uterus, not on the inside. And it just meant that I was having horrible periods and my hemoglobin went down to a 7, which is how they finally diagnosed it. I was saying I've got bad periods, but it took until my hemoglobin went down to 7, which is barely alive, for them to say, oh goodness, let's get you, screened for these diseases. And they found out that I had really bad case of adenomyosis. So I had a hysterectomy. Now, when I got the hysterectomy, they asked me, what kind of hysterectomy do you want? And I was like, I don't know what kind. It's like, it's like on the menu, do you want the salad or do you want the vegetables? Like, I don't know what kind of hysterectomy I want. So they said, well, we recommend the supracervical hysterectomy, which means you leave your cervix in. And I said, why? Why would I want to leave the cervix in? Isn't that the thing that gets diseased? And they said, well, there is some thought. It is believed that the cervix plays a role in sexual pleasure. Never trust passive voice, by the way. It is believed. Who believes that? Who believes that the cervix may play a role in sexual pleasure? By the way, which was malarkey and proven incorrect 5 years later when my cervix became diseased and I had to have another 8-hour surgery to remove it. And the beginning of the book is 2.5 weeks later, when that surgery, which ties up the vagina at the top, so you sort of have stitches at the top of the vagina when you remove the cervix, those stitches came undone. And so everything that was inside of me was falling out of me. It was like, it was out of some horror movie, right? Out of some horror movie in my apartment. My daughter, who was 20 years old at the time, now in medical school, probably a lot of reason because of this, she was like looking at the blood all over the apartment saying, we got to go to the hospital. And I of course was bleeding so profusely that I was like, oh, I'm so tired. We can go tomorrow, and she's 20 by herself with her mom saying, no, we got to go to the hospital now. And I'm yelling at her, we're not taking an ambulance to the hospital. We're going to take Uber Pool to the hospital.
Because
I was afraid of the cost of an ambulance. I'd read many stories about $4,000 bills, $10,000 bills for an ambulance. And I don't, like many Americans, have that extra cash. I just don't.
Right. So you're like, we're thrown into this like really rare, but, important medical emergency. And the other thing, by the way, it's interesting, the other diagnosis, because also with endometriosis, which is actually more common, it also takes years for people to get the diagnosis, and women are suffering for years with it. And there's so many other illnesses too that women suffer from in terms of like pain and sexuality and periods, that I always want to tell people, find someone who's trained in women's sexual health, not just a gynecologist, because a lot of gynecologists don't actually look into it any deeper than here, maybe you should go on the pill, or maybe you should, just relax more during your I mean, I've seen too many women suffering for too long.
Well, but the problem is, and and I did the research on this too, medical schools aren't teaching it. Maybe right now they're doing a better job. I hope so, because my daughter's in med school, right? But they are not teaching menopausal medicine. So for example, the woman that I see, the doctor that I see for menopausal medicine is self-taught. She's my age, 56. I think she's turning 57. We might be like a 1 year apart, but she said she learned nothing about this in med school. And it took her going through menopause herself to be like, wait a minute, I know nothing about this whole system and I'm going through it. How are my patients going to know anything about this? So she just reads and reads and goes to conferences and reads and is up on the latest. I've had recurring UTIs after this hysterectomy for years, and I was prescribed nitrofurantoin. I don't know if that's the correct way to say it, but it's an antibiotic that you take after sex. It's like the post-coital pill, right? And it's supposed to keep you from having UTIs. Well, it never really worked for me. And I must have written about this somewhere because a urologist in DC named Dr. Rachel Rubin reached out to me over Twitter in a DM saying, by the way, you don't have to suffer from UTIs anymore. All you need is vaginal estrogen. I was like, wait, what? And I went on vaginal estrogen and I have had not one UTI since. Why don't our doctors know this? It's not their fault. They're not being taught.
So I'm going to put a plug in for ISWSH, which is an organization, ISSWSH, where people are trained in sexual health, and they are getting this training. And you're right, they're not getting it in med school. And so, and there's a paucity of research on some of these issues. So, but let's go on, because I got to say, as a sex therapist, I'm continually seeing how women haven't been educated about how their body works, what causes it to stop working or go into dis-ease, as we call it, and how to get proper health care and pleasure through their sexual romantic experiences. So can you begin also, go on by saying why you literally organized your book? I'm going to put up the cover again, Ladyparts, into chapters named for body parts in which you experience pain or disease.
So it was one of those in the shower epiphany moments, right? I'd been trying to figure out how to write this book, and I tried to write it under several different constructions. So at first I was writing it as a book called Yes and it was about sort of my experience with improv and how that allowed me to sort of move out of this horrible divorce and into a new life. But nobody bought that book. So then I had another title, and that didn't work either. And then I was in the shower and I was looking down at all the scars on my body, and I have scars everywhere because I've had, appendectomy. I had, the uterus removed. I had the cervix removed. I had the vaginal cup dehiscence. So I'm just covered in scars. And it occurred to me that each of the scars represented a chapter in time. And it was sort of like one of those eureka moments, right? Oh, that's how I'm going to organize my book. And I didn't look back. I just thought, oh, this is how I'm going to organize the book. I called my agent that day. She said, yes, do that. Because each body part represented a distinct period in time, right? So for example, uterus, and also it served as a good metaphor for everything going on at the time. So we'll use uterus as the perfect example. While I was having my uterus out, my female mentor, who really served as sort of a maternal figure here in New York, was dying, unbeknownst to me. At the exact same moment I had my uterus out, my daughter, who was 15 at the time, got her period. So we have this confluence of three things happening at once. While my uterus is coming out, my maternal, my caretaker here in New York is dying, and my daughter's getting her period. So there was, it occurred to me that with every body part, breast, I was, dealing with being a single mother at the same time that I was dealing with a stage 0 breast cancer diagnosis. So each body part really did have a metaphorical and weirdly perfect way of describing what else was going on at the time. Heart, I had like my heart went on the fritz right as I was looking for love again. You know,
Yeah.
and it just it worked out. It just happened to work out for each of the 6 body parts.
Well, it works. It really does work. And the cover is actually very, I know that you had some say in the cover.
Yeah.
And the cover is very bold, and it's very, I mean, the fact that it's red and it's the color of love, the color of blood. I mean,
Yeah.
and yet she's standing with her hands on her waist figure going, I'm here, I'm still here.
Yeah, well, that was very deliberate. So, I mean,
By
they
the way,
showed me
I don't know if you know this, but I was a choreographer in my first life. So,
oh, well, I was a dancer for years from
oh,
age
really?
5 to 18. Yeah, I was a ballet dancer and also did some jazz in my teenage years. But so that figure is me. So I took a photo of myself in my bedroom during COVID, standing that way, because they'd shown me a bunch of different covers. You know, one of them was like what I had said originally is I said, why don't we do something that's kind of like a butcher's diagram, you know, when you have like the flank and the various parts of the pig. So I said, I'd like to just objectify my body in sort of a wink, wink way. But they had the body laying down. I was like, no, 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 she cannot be laying down. She must be active. And I said, just like, and I just sort of took a photo of myself and said, like this. And I think the designer just said, oh, that's perfect. We'll just use that. But the idea was like one of the cover designs they gave me was a diva cup with flowers coming out of it, which was really beautiful. But I was like, I don't get my period anymore, so like I don't use the diva cup anymore. So we shouldn't have, it takes a while to get the right cover. And I was really psyched when they got this one because it's kind of exactly how I pictured it, you know.
Good. Oh, good. Well, so in this book, you mentioned heart, the chapter heart. You're talking about this dying of your marriage and
Yeah.
how actually learning. There was a part in it which as a therapist, I'm a sex therapist, but I'm also a therapist. Learning about yours and your husband's or ex-husband's diagnoses actually helped reframe
Yeah.
how you began to relate to your now ex-husband, and also the lens through which you could now sort of view why the marriage or the relationship like hadn't worked as a whole. And I thought that was so insightful, as it occurs, like you have no idea how often I have couples come in and they don't realize like that either they have a diagnosis that's never been diagnosed or their partner does, and how they've been sort of like at each other and stuck for so long. So tell me, can you say more about like how that
Yeah,
happened, and if you're comfortable, like how the
totally.
romantic connection was impacted by these disorders?
So yeah, so when my husband and I were the same age, we're 44, um, he was diagnosed with Asperger's. And like suddenly all this anger that I'd had towards him, and I had a lot of anger because he just was not listening to me. He was not empathizing. I kept shouting, you have no empathy. And I just thought it was a matter of growing up. You know, we met when we were 24. I just thought, well, he's got to grow up. But it was like 20 years later, you know, when are you going to grow up, right? But it wasn't about growing up. It's literally that's the way his brain works, right? He didn't mean harm. And for me to actually then have empathy for him, do you understand? Like I was I was just filled with rage that nobody was hearing me, that my partner in life that had pledged love was not listening to me, was not hearing me, was not trying to stand in my shoes ever. And I kind of love that our couples therapist made you take your shoes off at the door, because every time I would leave, I would think like, why can't he stand in those shoes? Right. That's what was going on. And it took her to sort of say, we were sitting on each side of the couch every day, every week. And one day she just sort of throws up her hands and she said, look, every week you come in here and every week you cry, pointing to me, and you sit there on your side of the couch without coming over to just put your hand on her leg. You know, just a tiny motion to let her know you're there, that you care, that she's crying. Why aren't you being empathic? So then she sent us to an expert in Asperger's who diagnosed him. And it was kind of like, okay, well, let's see if we can work within this construct. And then in the end result, we couldn't work within that construct. I couldn't work within that construct. I broke up the marriage. I kind of, in the end result, I feel bad because he didn't want to break up that marriage. But I realized that I needed empathy or nothing, right? I would rather be alone than in a non-empathic relationship.
Mm.
And so what's really interesting now is we get along so well.
You don't have those expectations of him.
No, he came over for dinner the other night. My nephew's in town, so I invited him to come for a family dinner. My son was in a Brooklyn youth chorus, and so my ex-husband, his new girlfriend, who we all love, we're so grateful for Lily. My ex-husband and his girlfriend and I all sat together at the concert. And, there was one little moment where my ex we're all supposed to wear masks and he was wearing it below his nose. This is like his thing. And I said, everybody's supposed to wear the mask. And his girlfriend said, you're supposed to wear a mask. And he just kept it below his nose. And the girlfriend, unlike me, I would have just gotten furious, but she's so much calmer than I am. And she's so much better for him because she just rolls her eyes and laughs like, great. I'm so glad that he's found a partner that is not me,
So talk about because you also, I thought it was important because as a systemic sex therapist, I'm looking at the system, right? And you're talking about like all your wants and needs going just like being ignored or avoided because it's not in his lexicon, if you will. What was the impact on your side? Because you also had a diagnosis, and I think it was kind of a relational one.
Wait, I'm now confused. What is the diagnosis that we're talking about?
Well, I think you had written about the fact that you had dysthymia or depression that was related to lack of empathy.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So, yeah. Yes, I remember my depression. I wasn't sure where you're going with this. I was going darker and darker because I require empathy. Turns out my psyche requires empathy to survive. And I just was getting more and more and more depressed. I saw one therapist, I saw another therapist, and just, I realized that a lot of it was situational, right? For me, it wasn't chemical. Like when my dad died, right? My dad died of pancreatic cancer too young, and I had a year of just mourning and depression. It was the same kind of feeling, but it's like the absence, right? So when my dad died, there was an absence. When my marriage wasn't working out, there was an absence. I was mourning what wasn't there. And that can lead to serious depression. And I have to say, since leaving my marriage, I've had sort of moments of depression because you're dealing with the leaving of the marriage. But in general, I feel very optimistic. And I feel like, I was living with a partner post my, ex for 4 years. And it turns out that he was cheating on me. And I kind of was like, okay, goodbye. Like there's just, it was hard and it was sad. And I was sad for a month. And now I have to deal with, probably moving out of my apartment or whatever is going to happen. But these things don't send me into spiral anymore. I have found, and I just recently reread Ram Dass's Be Here Now, right? And I just kind of feel like that's where I am in life. And it's not always be here now, it's more like be here now-ish, right? Because, we have work to do as women to process what happened to us in the past and try not to have those things happen in the future. So we can't just live in the present, but I try as hard as possible to experience both the good and the bad in the present moment and not try to catastrophize of what this means later on. Just like deal with it right now. What's happening right now?
Right.
And it's kind of like there's a euphoria to that, even when bad things are happening.
Well, it's noticing, right? It's being embodied, and you don't have to leave your body, literally, figuratively, to just go, yeah, well, shit really does happen, but I'm not going to spiral around it. I'm going to just sort of one step, in front of the other kind of thing.
Well, but I also think that systemic estrogen has helped with that as well, right? Because I was going through menopause as I was dealing with all this. And, just when you're out of whack hormonally, things can go bad psychically as well, right? Right now I'm on sort of systemic Divigel, which is, a little gel you put on your thigh every morning. I'm on vaginal estrogen, which helps everything work down there sexually and urinary wise. And like, just everything's kind of working right now.
Right. And getting the people, the other thing is having faith in yourself that you
Yeah.
can find people who will help you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
a
I
lot of
have
people are kind of
fantastic.
passive in their life as opposed to, no, I'm going to figure this out.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, and that includes everything from doctors to lovers to, the people that you put in your life. And also it means getting rid of friends that are not supportive. What happens when you get divorced? And I know many people have talked about this before, but it surprised me when it happened, which is that friends drop you, particularly if they're couples in trouble. So couples in trouble don't want the divorced woman at their dinner parties because you represent to them the other side, the other option, the sliding door, right?
Well,
And I
it's
have good friends,
so
good friends.
classic, right? It's like, it really reminds me of the 60s or 70s, right? It's almost like a disease. It's like when they used to go, cancer, divorce.
Yeah, and I was sort of sad because I did lose friends that I loved, that I just thought, wait, I'm no longer invited. I am out. I'm on the outskirts of this now. Like, just because I don't have a partner, I can't get invited to your dinners or your this anymore. Like, it made me sad. But at the same time, you learn, okay, that's it. Goodbye.
Yeah. Well, I think people also realize that not only when they're going through a divorce, but when they're going through an illness, right?
Yeah.
They expect certain people to be there for them emotionally, if not physically, and it's like crickets, and you're like, what?
Right, right. I didn't bring this on myself. I actually heard recently something that surprised me, which was, through the grapevine, a friend that I really was wondering why they weren't around during a very difficult time. I'd heard that they said to somebody else, she's too chaotic. And I thought, she's too chaotic? What part of vaginal cup dehiscence did I bring on myself?
Mm,
What part of adenomyosis did I bring on myself? What part of breast cancer did I bring on myself? None of this. This is my body reacting, and this is me trying to survive it. And to call somebody who's going through medical issue on top, and again, ongoing. Now I've had COVID and I can't hear. Like, that's not chaos. That's called life. That's life.
yeah. And it's also called shitty luck.
Yeah.
And I think the lack of empathy is like loud and clear, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell the story? Because I think it sort of encapsulates like so much of what you're trying to get across in this book. This kind of ironic but horrendous story around in the chapter called Breast, where you had to get some healthcare to diagnose this, potential breast cancer, and you were in limbo because of your health insurance situation. So it just I think illustrates how tenuous most folks' healthcare is in this country. So can you
Completely.
tell that
So
story?
I was diagnosed with stage 0 breast cancer, but before even the diagnosis, I felt the lump, right? And I thought to myself, how am I going to get this lump checked out? Because my ex and I had just broken up. I didn't have health insurance anymore. I was counting on his health insurance before, but as part of the divorce and part of the separation, he ran off to California for 4 years and wanted to start a business. So there's just, suddenly we had no health insurance. So I was desperately looking for a job to get health insurance. And I eventually got that job to get health insurance. It was in a healthcare magazine. And I put it in quotes because it was really a pharmaceutical advertising ploy that masquerading as a health insurance, it's a health magazine. But anyway, prior to landing this job, I had a lump and I had to get it diagnosed. So I called the Harlem Breast Center because I was living in Harlem at the time. And I said, I don't have health insurance. Am I I don't want to take, a mammogram away from somebody from the neighborhood, but like, am I eligible for a free breast screening? And they said, actually, you are. If you have no health insurance right now, you can come in for free breast screening. I was like, great. Okay. So I can get the free breast screening. So I got the breast screening and they said, okay, you need to go for a biopsy because we see something on the mammogram. And I said, is that free? And they said, yes, it's part of this Harlem Breast Center. Thank God for the Harlem Breast Center. So they sent me to Sloan Kettering. I got the biopsy. And the biopsy showed that I had, stage 0. So it was fine. It was all contained. Everything was okay. But then I had to wait to get health insurance to get treated for it. So I could diagnose it without health insurance, but to treat it would require health insurance. The Harlem Breast Center couldn't pay for my care. They could only pay to tell me I was sick, right? So then luckily I got this job as a vice president, blah, 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 big title job at this health magazine, which shall not be named. And I was able to go through all the various permutations and combinations of what I needed to get done with that health insurance. But because I was leaving work like once a week to deal with this, I was fired 3 months into that job. And I was called into HR. And the thing that they said to me, and this guy got fired for this later on himself, he said, we couldn't even find you to fire you. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, you've been absent so many times. I said, okay, I'm going to show you my calendar, all my appointments at Sloan Kettering. Here's all the absences you're talking about. Like each one corresponds to a biopsy, a doctor's appointment, scan. Like, there's a lot of stuff. You go to a lot of appointments when you get a diagnosis of breast cancer, right? And I went in for a lumpectomy, which turned out I didn't even need, but I went in for the lumpectomy that day. Like, and he said, well, you've been absent too many times. I said, I was being treated. So once I lost that job, and he eventually lost his job, but, didn't help me.
Isn't that illegal?
It's illegal. Yeah, no, it's illegal. I got a lawyer involved, and it eventually led to me getting a tiny bit of severance, not much, but a tiny bit of severance to get me through the next 2 months, and him getting fired. But that didn't do anything for my breast, which needed to find out whether or not the lump had come back. And so I had to wait 6 months until I found a new job, and I had to take that new job at a salary far below my worth, just to have the health insurance so I could get the MRI, which was $6,000, which I don't have out of pocket, to make sure that the lump was gone. Now, the salary that I took just to get that health insurance was $39,000 a year, which doesn't cover a mother of 3, solo mother of 3. I was taking care of 3 kids on my own, paying rent on my own, paying for one college tuition, and then almost another. I mean, I was about to pay for my daughter's college tuition on $39,000 a year. That doesn't work. So I had all these other jobs. I had all this freelance work after work, but I was a solo mother. So it was like my poor kid never saw me. And then I found out later on that the man that was sitting next to me, who's a really good friend and who gone to the same alma mater that I'd gone to, we'd gone to the same school, we were around the same age, we had the same experience. He was getting $200,000 a year. But they knew they had me over a barrel because I was honest in my job interview, dumb idea, saying I have breast cancer. I need to get an MRI. But beyond that, I think I'm fine. I wanted to be upfront about it. Never again. I will never be upfront to any HR person ever again, because they will use it against you, and they will use it to get you at a wage that you are not worthy of.
So it actually is a great segue into my next question, which is because, this book highlights so many experiences that exist in a woman's body: health insurance, sexism, harassment, motherhood, sexuality, desire. And your book, Shutter Babe, also addressed some of these same issues, particularly sexism. And you've described these 2 books in other interview as bookends. So how have those conversations and the policies around these issues changed or not in the 20 years between?
They haven't. That is the nutshell. The nut graph is nothing has changed. And in fact, if you look at abortion, it's just gotten worse. If you're a woman in America, I think I saw, was there like this week, Bloomberg or Time, somebody had a cover story that's saying women have had it up to here. You know, we have just had it up to here. We are not provided maternity leave. We are not provided subsidized daycare. We are not provided, we are not allowed to stay in a hospital the days that we should be. We as a society just ignore the fact that women have babies and babies need to be raised, right? And I don't mean to just say women have babies. People with uteri have babies. I don't want to be, I don't want to exclude
Trans women,
trans women. Yeah, trans men,
non-binary women. Yeah,
trans men.
trans
But
men.
you know, babies are born, right? And if we're going to have no abortion in our country, who's going to take care of the babies? Hello, right? You know, nobody can live on one salary these days. I know that because I've been trying to do it. You know, no family can live on one salary these days unless you're a banker or doing, but if you're in, you know, one of the caring professions or one of the artistic professions, nobody can live on what we're being paid these days. And these babies are going to be born to single mothers. And where are they going to put the babies when they have to go to work? There's no crèche like they have in France. Like when my friend Marion, who's about my age, had her daughter around the same time as I was having my kids, our conversations were very weird because I was like, oh, I got to get a babysitter. And they're like, at the time, which was outrageous, $400 a week. Now they're like $700 a week, whatever they are. And she said, oh, well, I just put my daughter in the crèche from the age of 6 months on. And the crèche is you know, a daycare center that goes until her job ends. So it goes till 6 p.m. and then she comes to pick up her daughter. And it is a price that is based on her salary. Now, she was earning an excellent salary. She was one of the top editors at Paris Match. And what she paid every week for that crèche was the equivalent, I think, of 25 euros a week, right? 5 euros a day to have your child watched from the morning until night. Now that's a functioning society. And I'll even go one further. Like my son, he was 27, he got fed up with the United States and he moved to Istanbul. Now, Turkey is not the paragon of democracy, right? It's just not. But when he got bit by a stray dog a couple of weeks ago, and he was nervous about the cost of the hospital visit, I said, you just got to go. And he went to the hospital and he paid nothing because that's how a functioning society works. You go to the hospital, you're treated, you walk out. You're not faced with this $4,000 bill for a dog bite, right?
Right. So let's move on because I want to also talk about, you know, I'm a sex therapist. I talk to a lot of women who have a lot of internalized shame and disdain and a lot of anxiety to talk about any issues relating to their genitals, any sexual body parts, and their sexual desires. And so I created this term called sex esteem. That's what I'm writing about. And your writing was so bold and confrontational. And I wondered if you at times still have to work through any internalized cultural shame to talk about your body and sex so frankly.
I don't think so. I mean, I have been slut shamed in the press. I've been called, you know, there was a Talk magazine that came out right when Shutterbabe came out. The journalist wrote, I asked her if she's worried that her frankness will get her labeled a slut. I mean, and she prints that. You know, she prints that in a national magazine. So I have been slut shamed, but I myself feel no shame. And I wonder, it's like, you know, my parents walked around naked when I was little, and I, you know, until I was a teenager and didn't want them to walk around naked. They were very open about sexuality. They were open about loving each other. And also I've never really had shame. And I wonder if it's also Judaism in a way, because Judaism celebrates sexuality, right? There's not shame like there is in Catholicism, or I don't know about Christendom so much, but I know like Catholicism shames sex, whereas Judaism, you know, Shabbat, right? Friday night, candles, bread, wine, that's about sex. That's all it's about. You are to take a break from your work so you can have sex and have babies. And well, Judaism
is considered a mitzvah, actually.
It's considered a mitzvah to have sex on Shabbat.
Right.
Moreover, the Talmud, sorry, there's a noise outside, but the Talmud tells you, depending on the male's job, Like, are you a longshore fisherman or are you a lawyer? That's how many times a week you have to have sex with your wife. So, we're pretty, like, Jews are pretty great about sex. And we're also great about abortion, by the way. We don't believe a child or, a fetus has life until they're halfway out the birth canal. We don't name our babies until a week later because, in olden times, like, those babies wouldn't survive the first week, right? So we have this, like, very realistic, and I'm not even religious. I just happen to know all this because I was a Hebrew school teacher. Like, I went to Hebrew school, I did well, and then I got some money being a Hebrew school teacher. So I happen to know weird factoids about being a Jew, but not being a practicing Jew. But they do offer a real excellent guide to life, and particularly sexuality. And so when you ask me, do you feel shame over sex? Never. And I love sex, and I try to talk about it with my partners in ways that is edifying to both of us, right? I mean, I have, a partner right now. It's lovely, but, like, it's lovely because we're both open and out there about it.
Right. So, and one of the things you talk about at just post, post divorce, post separation, I guess I should say, is I love the way you differentiated between loneliness and solitude.
Yeah.
And that also you are contemplating all the references you have around being a feminist and the ideas that have been written about in terms of monogamy, the patriarchy, male privilege. When you were contemplating, what do I need? Like, what am I needing right now in terms of relationship or even just intimacy? And so can you talk about, like, kind of, what that was like for you and where it led you?
Sure. I mean, so I do believe that we are pair bonding creatures, we humans, right? I know for myself, I know that there's a grand bell curve of sexuality, and there are people who are asexual. I am on the opposite end of that, right? I know I need sex, and I will do what I need to do to get it. I also know there's two types of sex, right? There's the sex that you get that's kind of like candy, like you just need it, and so you get it. And then there's the sex that's transformative and loving, and there were negotiations in my own mind of, well, how much of this candy am I willing to put up with to find the real thing? And then, sort of within that construct, I would meet people online, right? On the apps have made it very easy to meet people who have become some of my best friends that started off as lovers, right? But there was something that wasn't going to work out about it. So, for example, one person who shall remain nameless was 19 years younger than me, but we really transformed each other's lives, and we are still good friends. And there was love there. No question that there was love there, but there was also an excellent communication that this is for both of us a stepping stone to somewhere else. And I'm going to help you find someone else, and you're going to help me find someone else. But for the moment, we can share these intimacies. And, I think back on those 6 months and the relationship that has formed since. So, for example, after the partner that I was living with, I discovered the infidelity. The first person I called was this younger man, and he came running over, and he was exactly what I needed at that moment. He has a girlfriend now, so we weren't having sex, but he said, you deserve much better than this. You're one, like, he just said all the words of affirmation that I needed in that moment, the loving words of affirmation that this wasn't about me. This was about him. You're wonderful. He doesn't deserve you. All the things you want to hear when you've broken up with somebody or you've discovered infidelity.
Yeah.
So sometimes in the search for what I call the candy sex versus the real sex, like, you do discover these incredible, strong bonds that last forever. I mean, last until this day.
So they're not really candy, because when we think about
Right.
candy, we're thinking about like instant gratification. The
There's
sugar,
some like that.
you get a high from the sugar and then there's a downer. But you're talking about actually that even with the potential of something is not going to end up in a monogamous long-term relationship, there can be love. And that's what I want to kind of sort of pull out from
Okay. All right. Yeah. I really truly believe that. And then there was sort of another much younger man who, again, I couldn't find anyone my age. So I was just dating younger at the time until I found somebody my age. Because again, like I wasn't just going to be alone. Like I wanted to have a sex life, you know? And so one of the other younger men, we had a short-lived relationship as well. Again, very loving, but he was moving to China and I knew he was moving to China. But when I bled out from vaginal cuff dehiscence and I was by myself in my apartment recovering, he said, who's taking care of you? And I said, nobody. And he said, you can't, like, that's why you had this, because nobody's taking care of you after the tracheolectomy. He's like, I can't, you know, I'm too busy right now to get all the way to the United States. Can you get to Nepal? And I said, I guess so, you know. And he said, Nepal's great. It's cheap. You know, we can get a hotel room for $24 a night and I will take care of you. And so I looked into a home health aid, and a home health aid was going to be $200 minimum a day. And the trip to Nepal was free on points and essentially half of $25 a day of a hotel fee. So it's like, you know, $12.50 a day with a partner who was a nursemaid and who wouldn't let me carry a thing. So if once I was getting a little bit stronger and we went on a little, you know, tiny hike, he wouldn't even let me carry my water bottle. Now that's love too, right? These were relationships that I will remember forever. They were wonderful in their own way. They had their own space and time. And I'm grateful for them because they were loving.
So I want to emphasize two things here. The first part, right, which is you can find love even in short-term relationships, but also that you're considered middle-aged.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're all having longer lives, hopefully. But that a lot of women won't even put themselves out there because they feel like, you know, not good enough, not sexy enough. They're going to be ghosted, which happens a lot online, or they're not interested in men who are older because they haven't kept themselves in as good shape, right? And so, you know, they sort of keep themselves out of even the possibility or hope.
So I think that's sad, and I understand why it happens, but really, truly, the apps make it super easy these days to meet people. And, you know, when I talk about these wonderful men that I met, you know, there were 99 others that were horrible, right? But I think maybe my journalism experience helped in dating because for my job, sit down in front of a person often and interview them. So I viewed every date, not as a date, not as a potential for love, but as a journalism assignment, right? Get to know this person. Are they worthy of your time? And again, 9 times out of 10, no. And, you know, so you don't make a dinner date, you make a coffee date, right? A half an hour, plan a half an hour, you can tell who somebody is within a half an hour. And, you know, I write about many of the comical moments, like the guy that said he was in his 50s, who was actually in his 70s. You know, people lie all the time. If you're savvy enough, you can figure it out. And again, if you are going into each date as if it's a journalism assignment instead of, you know, the chance for love, then you're never disappointed, because out of it, you're going to get a story, right? You're going to get a funny story, especially if it's a truly bad date. If you think like, okay, this is the worst date of my life, but boy, I cannot wait to tell my friends about it. Then it's all whatever. It's water under the bridge.
Or we say grist for the mill.
Grist for the mill. Exactly. Better.
Right? So, by the way, just for those of you who are watching this, like one of the things I love about this book as well is Deborah goes into great detail of telling you how much everything costs, just like she did in this last story, because you know, financial realities are the way we make decisions in our life, including who's going to take care of us, right? So I want to just finish up by saying, like, many people, many folks are now creating what they call chosen families, or even variations on polyamory or non-monogamous relationships. And what was interesting in this book was you invited a few people to share your home and your family life, first out of financial necessity, but then it seems to have transitioned into something else. And so can you talk about how you think the definition of the American family has morphed for many folks,
Sure,
and for yourself?
that's a great question. So I was living in a house in Harlem. Again, my ex-husband sort of zipped away to California. And so I had this house, and it was a $3,500 a month. I'll give numbers because I think it's important. It was $3,500 a month rent that was being raised to $5,000, and I couldn't afford that on my own. So I had a friend, George, whose husband had just committed suicide, and we ran into each other at our college reunion. And he was talking to me about this, and I was telling him about my divorce, blah, blah. And really, it occurred to both of us at the same time, like, why don't you just come live with me, pay rent at my place, rent out your place. So he had a place in the village. He rented it out for more money than he was paying me, so he could make a little extra money that way. And in his mourning of his partner who killed himself, he had a family around. Like he was a gay man without kids, right? So suddenly he had my kids. Well, my two that were left at home. One was at college, and then I had a daughter who was at the time 16 and a son who was 7. And then we got a babysitter that was living with us, who was just like this wonderful 22-year-old, actress, singer, who just like brought music into the home and life and young energy. And I would come home from work, from my like shitty job at the health magazine dealing with breast cancer, and it was just like, it was a party every night. And we would play guitar, and we would sing, and we would have dinner together, and we called ourselves the commune. And even now, like my ex-partner of the apartment I'm sitting in right now is paying rent up until March of this year. And then I'm not going to be able to afford this place on my own because, he signed a lease for this amount of time. So suddenly I'm like, okay, well, maybe I can take a boarder into this room that my ex-partner had his office in. And, it doesn't frighten me because I know that that can be fun. Like if I got to find a fun person though, like I've got to find somebody that I vibe with, because I do know we had a boarder that was not very fun after a little while. But yeah, I see commune living. I see a future of commune living, like a bunch, like all the men are going to die because that's what happens, right? We women live much longer than the men. And I can't foresee a moment where like 3 girlfriends and I all decide to like get a home together, or get homes, contiguous to each other, or apartments contiguous to each other. Or even, my daughter, who is, in a serious relationship and is talking about having kids, she said to me, like, would you come be our live-in babysitter? I was like, of course, anytime. Like, I would love to be that, So I don't have an idea of where I'm going to be in the future, but I don't have a fear that I don't have that idea. I am open to all possibilities and all different types of living arrangements. And I kind of find that exciting in its own way,
And again, I'm going to wrap it up because it also ended up with people loving each other.
Yeah.
And it started with financial necessity, but it created something. And so I have to say, Deborah, that is different from when you wrote Shutter Babe, right? Communes are something that people associate with the 60s and 70s. So I think this sort of new sort of opening up of what a family is, or what it should be, based on love and financial necessity, I think that is different. I think that, and as you're saying, like people are trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do when I get older?
Right. Yeah. A lot of us are like, am I going to eat cat food? That's a real possibility for so many of us. I had to dip into my 401k when I was really suffering through all these financial and medical issues. And, there's just not a lot left over. So I'm going to either be working until I drop, or I'm going to be sharing a home with someone. I don't know. But, you mentioned polyamory before, and I've actually thought, like, could I live in a polyamorous relationship? And I know myself, I can't. Like, I'm a monogamous girl. Like I call myself a girl. I'm a monogamous woman. I need the safety and trust of a monogamous relationship. And when I found out that my partner was cheating on me, that to me was it. Like that, there's no trust. You're lying to me. That's it. I can't live with that. So we all have to know our limitations.
Right. So, last question. We're talking a lot about women in this book and in this discussion. What were your hopes regarding the possibility of male identified folks potentially reading this book and getting something out of it?
So I wasn't, when you write a book, you write it for yourself. I really believe that you're writing the book that you would like to pick off the shelf. So I'm not really thinking about my male audience as I'm writing. I'm just not. I'm thinking about a reader like me. The surprising part of publishing this book is that it's not that I get half of my letters from men, but I would say a good 25 to 30% of the letters and DMs that people send me after reading this book are from men. And what they say to me is this, various versions of this. I feel like I have a playbook for my wife's psyche.
Mm.
I did not know that this is what women went through.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot believe that this is your reality. And so even when I was sending the book out for blurbs, to male authors, it was the male authors like Andy Greer, who's the Pulitzer Prize winning author of Less, and he's come out with a new book, a follow-up to that. His reaction is something I will never forget. He was just like, I cannot believe that this is how American women live. I can't believe it. And it was so edifying to get those kinds of reactions from men, because again, I wasn't thinking about them when I was writing. I don't think about my reader at all. I'm literally thinking, I need to write the book that I need to write. I'm the kind of person that would want to buy that book, that would pick it off a shelf. That's all I'm thinking. I'm not writing to an audience. I'm not writing to a reader. I'm not writing to try to fill a niche audience. I'm just writing the book I need to write in that moment.
Good answer. Thank you. So, do you have any words of wisdom? Mm-hmm. You have young kids, not young adult kids, I guess. Yeah. What is your message to them about their health, their sexuality, their relationships? What are kind of the mantras that you want to send across to the next generation? Because
I've been very open about sexuality with all my kids, to the point where they're like, yes, mom, I know about the clitoris, like maybe a little bit too much. Like I gave my son recently, he turned 16, and I just gave him a jar full of condoms. I said, just put them in your bottom drawer. You might need them someday. Like, I just want to make sure that they understand that I know, I care, I accept them for who they are. But I think that sexuality, like they got it on the sexuality front. I think what's important, which they didn't get to see growing up, because their dad and I had a problematic relationship. What I'm hoping that they can find in their own relationships is empathy and working together.
Or they learned it through watching you.
Well, through watching what I did wrong. You know what I mean? But again, I guess my divorce.
What you do with your friends, what you do with your mentor, what you do with your, the family that you created. I mean, there are plenty of examples in your life where you were, giving and receiving love that didn't include, your husband. And I think that's really a great message and a great place to stop.
Okay, great. Thanks. It was really nice talking to you. I appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah. No, I'm glad I finally got the time to start, interviews again, because it takes a lot. Anyway, great to see you. Hope to see you in person sometime soon.
Well, I'll come visit Lisa, my agent. That's where we met before. So I'll come visit. Yeah.
And it's Ladyparts. Pick it up.